Next up is Rachel O'Leary. She here? All right, good. Without further ado, Rachel, if you want to come up. So the first talk essentially was kind of around why liberty matters. That was the idea. This is why privacy matters. Obviously, it's going to go into why liberty matters as well, and essentially why decentralized currencies matter. And Rachel will express that much more eloquently, actually, than I can. She is very inspiring when she speaks, and you will experience that right now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Give me 1 minute to set up here.
Take this, Anita. Guys, whoa, hey. All right, we're good. Why she sets up, just want to, thank everybody again for coming. Thank everybody that's been helping us along the way. We have people, random people, internet friends that have reached out that are helping us. As I'm sure you can see, everybody's like scuffling around here. So it's just amazing that's, that happens in the Monero community. People are always willing to lead a lending hand towards, working towards this common goal of spreading the idea of digital cash. So it's beautiful to see on the internet, obviously, through the form of the protocol, but it's also beautiful to see in reality, in person, when people come together and make it happen. Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You guys can hear me okay? Okay. Amazing to be here. So many people that I knew online, but I've never met in person. So it's really nice to have this this get together. And someone here reminded me that the Monero community hasn't had a significant meetup for a number of years. So it's great to see everyone. So I'm Rachel Rose O'Leary. My friends call me Rose. And I'm a programmer with a philosophy background. And I work on a project called DarkFi, which I will discuss a little bit later on. But first, I want to tell you a little story, which is about the place where I'm from. So I'm from Ireland. And some thousands of years ago, the island of Ireland was covered in trees. A dense forest, which was the type of which was called a Celtic rainforest. And these forests were the center of Irish society. So that's where the houses were built. They were built around the trees. The forests shaped the Irish language, the culture, and the spirituality kind of radiated out from the forests. During the process of British colonization, the forests were systematically cleared. This event, which occurred over the course of a couple of centuries, had an enormous significance for Irish resistance against the colonial forces. So having the forest cleared meant that the guerrilla resistance, which resided there, was exposed. So they lacked the tree coverage, which enabled them to coordinate and to launch sabotage and ambush attacks. So having cleared the forests, the defeat of the Irish resistance was accelerated and the process of colonization was completed. This process eventually turned the Irish landscape into a kind of agricultural backwater for the British Empire. So they, having cleared the forests, converted much of the land into potato farms. And this kind of desertification of the Irish landscape corresponded with a tendency towards a more centralized government, in the form of the British Empire, and later an Irish government which mirrored the same system as England had before them. And it also gave way to a very oppressive form of monotheism that emerged, a shift away from the more polytheistic tendencies of the forest society that had existed before. And more recently, a new kind of desert has emerged, which is the kind of desert of globalization, where a lot of Irish identity has been worn away. You can change slides. So historically, these kind of diverse geographies, places like forests, like mountains, like cliffs or jungles, have given way to forms of political organizing which are more decentralized inherently. So contemporary examples of these kind of struggles of an autonomous people against an empire which, you know, is historically more closely connected to flatlands and deserts, where we see centralization is more likely to occur. Contemporary examples include the Kurds in the mountains of Kurdistan, the Tigrays in Ethiopia, and the Zapatistas in Mexico. These are all autonomous peoples which come from mountain areas with a decentralized politics, a pluralistic mindset, who are at war with the forces of centralization, authoritarianism that are more closely associated with desert flatlands. Change slide. Yeah, so I see an analog between this duality of the forest and the desert in the war, the digital war between encryption and surveillance. So encryption is a forest. It protects its inhabitants. It provides sanctuary for those who are persecuted, and it provides a critical line of defense. Surveillance, on the other hand, is a desert. It's a force of homogenization that turns everything within it into the mimicry of the same static thing. So privacy, I was asked to talk about the importance of privacy, and here's what I think the importance of privacy is. Privacy, encryption, the digital forest, enables us to establish autonomous territories in cyberspace. So this is the dream of the crypto anarchists. They spoke about carving out dark spaces on the internet that were impenetrable by law enforcement and the forces of coercion that they represent. It's also the dream of the agorists, who spoke about building autonomous economies, counter economies they were called, that existed alongside, parallel to, but distinct from state-based economies that were like inherently extractive and centralized. You can. Okay, so this is what I see the current situation that we have. There is a feedback loop between anonymity and surveillance, whereby these two tendencies are developing in tandem with each other. The more extreme and oppressive surveillance becomes, the more advanced anonymity techniques must be in order to overcome the encroachment of surveillance. So this means we have the parallel development of extreme surveillance with extreme anonymity. These two parallel processes, to me, implies that there will be a split in the digital world between spaces which are surveilled and oppressed and spaces which are encrypted and autonomous. I call this RegFi, regulated finance, and DarkFi, dark finance, of which Monero is a part of. DarkFi. So DarkFi is not just, you know, this phenomena of a anonymous underworld breaking away from a surveillance-based regime. It's also the name of a project which I'm working on with many others, and we're building anonymous smart contracts geared towards the Monero community. So it's free software. We use the AGPL license. We believe in empowering developers as opposed to enslaving them. So a big part of what we do is providing flexible toolkits for developers to deploy in order to create any kind of anonymous application. So we really want to empower developers. We believe in the ability of programmability to lead to massive innovation when it comes to that application design. We're also built in line with the Unix philosophy. So we have a strictly simplicity-oriented approach. I encourage you all to check out our repo on GitHub, darkrenaissance/DarkFi. And so we're in the early stages. We have a prototype. We're very close to testnet, and then we will deploy a mainnet soon. But the idea is Monero community can use these tools to use or to deploy applications such as anonymous swaps between different currencies, decentralized anonymous organizations, multi-chain anonymous bridges between different chains, information black markets. The list goes on. There's many exciting. It's a whole new design place of anonymous design that hasn't been explored. So we're trying to blow that door wide open for developers. I want to talk a bit about my own love for Monero, because I really love Monero. I've been in love with Monero since around 2017, and I worked for CoinDesk around that time, and I showed my bias, my love for Monero in a lot of articles I wrote where I was trying to defend Monero against FUD and fake news attacks by other blockchains, and on the front lines of the media trying to defend Monero. I love Monero so much that I actually have a Monero tattoo on my heart. It says XMR. I'm really into, I love Monero. And the reason why I love Monero is there's a few reasons. So one is that it's a genuinely grassroots community. So it was a fair launch, which is beautiful. It was abandoned by its original creator and adopted by the community, much like Bitcoin was. And as well as that, Monero has genuinely grassroots network effect among these critical use cases such as darknet markets, and also many freedom fighter activist friends of mine who are not in crypto use Monero. They don't use Zcash as the privacy coin. They have some kind of intuitive distrust of Zcash, but they use Monero. So I think that's really bullish for Monero. They don't know anything about crypto, but they know that Monero is what they should use to protect their transactions. That's very bullish. And I also love Monero because of the community. Monero, and I've researched this, okay, so Monero has the most ideological, philosophical community in the whole of crypto. There is no other community in crypto that puts its political line at the forefront of its work. So that's been a deep inspiration for me, and part of the reason why I've loved Monero for so long. I also love Monero because historically, Monero has proven adaptability. And that's, some friends arrived. That's amazing, and it's really important for a privacy coin because we have this co-development of anonymity with surveillance techniques. Privacy coins must adapt and evolve as surveillance becomes increasingly hostile. So I have faith in the Monero community in their ability to adapt to these evolving environments. With that said, I would like to draw attention to one drawback of the current Monero implementation, which is ring signatures. So ring signatures have a important constraint, which is that they have what's called linear running time. You can see that here on the slides. It's represented by this O and then N. That means linear running time. So linear running time means that if you have a ring size of 11, as we do now, we're getting an upgrade to 16 pretty soon, but let's go with 11 for now. If you have a ring size of 11, that defines firstly your anonymity set. If you, for example, decided that anonymity set was no longer sufficient for a state level adversary, then you could say, okay, let's double the ring size. However, due to this property of ring signatures, this linear property, if you double the ring size, you also double the running time, the compute time of that transaction. So that's a restriction. It defines a cap on the possible anonymity provided by ring signatures. ZK snarks, on the other hand, have a interesting property. They're logarithmic. So what does that mean? In ZK snarks, the anonymity set is defined by the height of the Merkle tree. So in DarkFi, we have an anonymity set of 2 to the power of 32, 32 being the height of the Merkle tree. So if I wanted to double the anonymity set, I would just do a small change to the circuit, which would require a hard fork, to change that Merkle tree size to 2 to the power of 33. So the increase, as opposed to being a doubling, is a logarithmic increase from 2 to the power of 32 to 2 to the power of 33. So it's relatively much smaller than the ring signature increase would require. I will note that historically, Monero community have rejected ZK snarks based on its use of the trusted setup. I think that this was the correct approach. The ZK snarks in the early days, you were right to not trust them and to reject the trusted setup. However, nowadays it is possible to do ZK snark without a trusted setup. And DarkFi is doing that. We use Halo 2. There's no trusted setup. So Monero community, you are our comrades. We want to work together with you. Anything you need to, think about moving away from ring signatures, we will provide you anything you need. Research, developers, conversations, we can do that. Okay, next slide, please. So why are we working? Why are we doing this? What is the vision? So I call it neo-cypherpunk. Neo-cypherpunk draws on the heroic legacy of the cypherpunks and the crypto-anarchists who came before us. It draws on this heroic legacy, but it also tries to think, what were the drawbacks of the original cypherpunk vision? And what are the ways that we can update this vision for the contemporary world? So one possible drawback that I see of the old school cypherpunk vision was the emphasis on personal liberty. So personal liberty is really important. Don't get me wrong. However, if we truly want to encounter state-level surveillance, we need to act as a collective. So neo-cypherpunk shifts the focus away from personal liberation to collective or society scale liberation. That's the goal. The second difference between the old school cypherpunk and the neo-cypherpunk is its conception of freedom, its definition of freedom. So traditional libertarianism and old school cypherpunk define freedom as a negative. So freedom is seen as freedom from coercion. Again, that's part of freedom. However, I believe we should seek to define freedom in a positive sense. So the positive definition that I would offer for freedom is freedom of self-determination. And when applied to the kind of former statement I made regarding collective liberation, this becomes freedom of societal scale self-determination. And I believe it is anonymity that allows us to achieve this. This is our manifesto on our website. I encourage everyone to check it out. On the website, you will also find links to our GitHub and our chat, which is on Matrix right now, although we've made our own peer-to-peer IRC implementation, so we're going to shift to that pretty soon. But I welcome you all to join and discuss these topics for me. Thank you so much.
You guys have any questions? Anybody want to throw a question out there? All right, hold on. Excuse me, guys.
I was just wondering if ZK Slark implementation would decrease the usage on one CPU. Like, would it change it to be ASIC compatible or not? Okay, that's all I need to know.
I think we have another up there. Hello? Another mic up there. Rachel, amazing talk. You brought up the fact that to kind of win this battle of privacy, because it is a constant battle, we have to always evolve and change. There's a conference going on down the block where they pride themselves essentially in staying stagnant and not changing. They see that as an ideal, that the protocol essentially will never change. What is your take on that?
Thank you so much. I'll just quickly give my response, which is that no, it wouldn't require ASICs. It might actually be cheaper to run than rig signatures. It probably would be. So you could run on GPU, CPU. Thank you so much for your question. This is why I brought up adaptability in the slides, because especially for privacy coins, but also for all coins, you have to retain the ability to update your source code. I think the issue with Bitcoin, to be perfectly honest, is there has been two kind of parallel developments. One is that the developer class has basically become ossified and complacent and comfortable. You know, they all did well off of their Bitcoin. They have no incentive to innovate. So they're essentially squatting the hierarchy of Bitcoin and making the source code is basically rotting under their eyes. At the same time, you also have the kind of popular narratives within within Bitcoin, not Monero, evolving towards, as you said, this whole kind of value of let's not change the code base ever. And I think that's coming from non-programmers who are coming at it from a purely economic perspective. They're like, we want a stable store of value. We don't want to disrupt it with any hard forks, which is like fair enough. But as programmers, we know that you cannot keep code exactly the same forever, because there is a phenomena called code rot, where the code will just disintegrate and become more complex over time, which is what we're already seeing with Bitcoin. It's reached the point where other programmers, new programmers, cannot properly use it or make changes because it's beyond them. And in the early days, there was efforts also by my co-founder in DarkFi, Monerotopia, to make changes to the Bitcoin protocol to clean up the source code. He wrote libBitcoin, which is the most efficient Bitcoin implementation. But these were broadly rejected by the Bitcoin community as being too high risk.
Yeah, guys, Monerotopia. Raise your hand if you guys have heard that name before. All right, amazing that a lot of people haven't, right? I mean, this guy, he's one of the OGs. He's one of the guys who is talking about the importance of crypto being resistant to state influence from the early days. He's one of the guys that really understood what its main purpose was and is. And so I encourage you guys to do a little Googling, watch some of his videos. Go ahead, you have a question? Monerotopia, right?
the direct evolution of the original Dark Wallet project, where it was originally CoinJoin, but then the alpha was made the beta, I think, and then some time later, Amir came back to it and was like, okay, realizing CoinJoin is broken. Basically, CoinJoin suffers from a linkability problem, the same issue as ring signatures, except for CoinJoin is even worse. The current most popular implementation of CoinJoin is Samurai Wallet. They have an anonymity set of 5. So compare that to Monero, where you have anonymity set of 11, plus you're having a hard fork soon, that's going to be 16. You can see it's much better.
And then we got Seraphis too coming up. I don't know if you're familiar with
that. So I heard, I had a little introduction. But yeah, so Dark Wallet was CoinJoin, and then over the years, Amir, he did implementations of all the major crypto algorithms, including rig signatures, and eventually came to ZK Snarks as being the most robustly anonymous and the most flexible anonymity technique today. So that's the one that DarkFi is using for its anonymous payments, and it has the ZK VM where you can compile contracts to in zero knowledge.
I'm going to keep asking you questions if you don't mind, because somehow we caught up on time, even though we started late, which is amazing and awesome. I don't know what we just did. We bent the universe there. And just to say, Seraphis. So we have Ko, who's coming up. He is like the main guy behind the Seraphis implementation in Monero. It's amazing that he's going to be here speaking today, guys. I mean, that's just insane. And then we also have Sarang, the other major big brains behind these cryptographic concepts. So just to put that out there, the points that you were making with ring signatures. Yes, we'll be touching on that more, but what you need to realize is ring signatures is one component of Monero, right? We have confidential transactions, which obfuscate the amounts. Nobody's breaking that as far as we know. We have stealth addresses, so you don't know who you're sending. Nobody can see who the Monero, who's receiving the Monero. That's an important thing to remember when people criticize ring signatures. Realize that's only one component, and that's obfuscating who the sender is, and that's always evolving and getting better. So just an important note to make there. So what is your take then on Bitcoin? What role do you see it playing? Do you think ultimately it's just going to embrace the fact that it is fundamentally transparent at the protocol level and be useful for those purposes? Or will it eventually, achieve something that Monero is achieving as digital cash?
I think it's unlikely. We saw how Taproot took years to get in, even after it was finished, the implementation. And Taproot was a fairly minor, insignificant change. So I think it's fairly unlikely that Bitcoin will adopt, ZK Snarks or, something that will make it properly anonymous. However, it depends very much on the core developers themselves. In Bitcoin and in crypto projects in general, the power base is often obfuscated. So you have this developer class at the center who are making critical decisions about the life cycle of the protocol that they're working on. But they often deflect that power. They don't want to be seen to have it. But they do. They're the ones calling the shots. And we saw this with the Bitcoin scaling debate, where there was an attempted takeover by the business class inside of Bitcoin. And the core developers showed that they were the ones who controlled the user base effectively. They were the ones who had the soft power to influence a kind of uprising on the network, which pushed out the business class. So you had the Bitcoin Cash, and that was the illegitimate coin. And then you have Bitcoin itself was the coin where the developers were, that the core developers were. So they have this really important role of defining what is the legitimate coin. So if the Bitcoin core developers decided that they were going to do that, and they were like seriously going to do that, then it would possibly be something that happened. But I don't think that they will, for two reasons. They're not properly. Developers should be constantly training the next generation of developers, which is going to supersede them. Otherwise, you end up with this ossified class and no upward mobility in the protocol. So Bitcoin, they're not putting in necessary effort to training the next generation of developers. And developers that they do have, all due respect to them, have no incentive to innovate. So I don't see privacy being added to Bitcoin anytime soon.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, confidential transactions that was developed by
Gregory Maxwell,
Bitcoin developers.
Yeah.
But they have yet to implement it, and it doesn't. That's not happening, right? I mean, right. You don't think that's going to happen. So, do you think it's that privacy needs to fundamentally be built into the core protocol, or do you think there are ways to do what Bitcoin is trying to do, which is basically obfuscate on the second layer?
Yeah, I think you can do that second choice. Like for example, on Ethereum, I think the form of privacy that I'm using a lot is, and I actually used it to anonymize my entry into Monero, which I really liked, was the zk.money. So that's a layer 2 made by Aztec, which is on ETH, and you can basically put your ETH onto the layer 2. They use ZK snarks then to like break the link. They mint you a new coin basically on the layer 2 that you can withdraw to the layer 1, and you end up with this freshly minted like clean ETH on whatever ETH address you send it to. And you can use that ETH then. It's very cheap. It costs barely nothing because it's on the layer 2. It takes 6 hours though, ish. So you have to have time, but you can use that ETH then. For example, I used it on Cake Wallet to buy Monero. So that's a really nice clean entry to Monero.
Good plug there. Good plug.
Yeah, so that's an example of one of the best anonymity techniques existing on the layer 2 today. However, and I do think there's a place for that. However, you're obviously sacrificing a lot if you're only relying on the layer 2 for privacy. And as we know in Monero, the more people who are using your network for privacy, the more anonymous it is. So it's better, I believe it's better to aggregate all your users onto anonymous layer 1 rather than splitting up your user base between fragmented layer 2s. However, we do have, like, DarkFi is a layer 1. It has its own blockchain. So we're biased in the sense that we think layer 1s are the best way to capture the value created by a network. So we're biased towards the layer 1 implementations for that reason.
Yeah, I think what Bitcoiners would say there is, well, that sounds great in theory, but they're concerned about auditability. And we're going to cover that as well. We have Sarang that's going to be covering that topic. That's always kind of one of the ultimate arguments that comes up against Monero, and we'll cover that. Do you have an opinion there on kind of that philosophical question, because that's ultimately what it becomes?
I mean, it is useful for some things, like for example, Zcash, they have this issue of not being able to audit their supply, and that's an issue because they have a trusted setup where if someone was to have the toxic waste, like the thing that you're not supposed to have, that's split between, when you do a trusted setup, it's split between whoever participated. It's like if they were to collude, they could create like a secret which would allow them to mint new coins on the network. So there's no way to actually check if that's happened because they can't audit the supply. So that's an issue in some ways. But it's not an issue that like I'm particularly worried about. I still think anonymity is more important than optional auditability.
Awesome. I guess another thing that Bitcoiners would say is, well, the fact that the Monero is so private makes it a target of governments. You know, some Bitcoiners would say, right? Some would, wouldn't go down that road. They want to, sell the Cypherpunk ideal without really being too cypherpunk anymore. But others would straight up say and admit, like, well, Monero, it sounds great, once again, in theory, but if exchanges aren't listing it, if, governments are after it, it's not going to have liquidity. It's difficult to get because, people are threatened by it. What's your take on that as to, I guess, one, do you think ultimately it is threatened by that? And two, to people who are staying away from it because of that?
I think the kind of situation that you outlined, where like the governments are concerned and cracking down, I think in a roundabout way, this is a good thing. Like, this is good for Monero. It emboldens Monero, it radicalizes it, and it reinforces its autonomy as something distinct, which is outside this, state-based, surveillance-based regime. So I think that the tension between the anonymous world and the non-anonymous world is good and necessary and should accelerate. I think that it's part of how anonymous crypto achieves its self-determination and autonomy. It's part of how it manages to articulate its own values, which are distinct from the values of like the current system. So I think it's really good. And yeah, I mean, there is the kind of risk that, like you said, that some people will be like, oh, if it's autonomous and if it's like outside the surveillance system, I don't want to partake. And that's fair enough, like they want to be in the regulated environment. But I think that over time, as what we call DarkFi, is like the anonymous side of crypto, becomes more powerful, there will be a shift from one side to the other. Also, I forgot to mention in my talk, I have this theory, what's called the regulation trap. So the regulation trap is basically the more restrictive and oppressive governments become in their attitude to crypto, the more effort they invest in trying to crack down on it, the more crypto is essentially justified. So you have this like increasing oppression, and with it, an increasing migration to the anonymous side of crypto. So by trying to crack down, they're actually magnifying the problem. We see this already happening in Europe, where they've just banned transactions, anonymous transactions above 1,000 euro. Means you have to KYC, you're supposed to KYC all your people you're transacting with. But obviously it means that people are going to migrate to anonymous alternatives, because you can't expect, like, they're just laws that you cannot enforce.
So do you see the adoption of Monero, or whatever the true digital cash protocol becomes, whichever one ends up taking that role on? So far, Monero is, has the lion's share of all transactions for that use case. But whatever it is, whatever one ends up doing it, do you see that being inevitable, that society globally adopts a true digital cash protocol that's used by essentially everyone, citizens around the world? I mean, do you see that as kind of an inevitability? I
don't think it will be used by everyone. I think at least not in the short, immediate term, or even longish term. I think we will have little pockets, zones of freedom popping up, these kind of autonomous territories breaking away. But we will also have this clear net, plain text surveillance paradigm existing alongside these autonomous online territories. So I think we'll see both. And over time, I expect people to demonstrate a preference for the autonomous territories over the surveilled ones.
All right. Yeah, we're obviously the ones that make it happen. Seth, go ahead. You have a question? But I was going to say, that's what Monerotopia is all about. It's about this idea of opting out of what we're saying dystopia and into Monerotopia. And that's really what's going to determine whether or not Monero or some other form of digital cash succeeds. It's whether enough people adopt it. Beyond that, there's nothing else that could stop it.
Just a really quick question and a comment. The offer to help Monero migrate to ZK Snarks or something like it is very interesting. I'm definitely curious to hear more about that, because obviously with the decentralization of Monero funding and driving big migrations like that is a big deal. But along those lines, and if I missed it, because I missed a little bit of the presentation, feel free to brush me off. But why do you view ZK snarks or that type of technology as being trustless enough today to implement on a base layer like Monero? I know there's been a little context. I know there's been issues in the past with the trusted setup. It's slowly gotten better and better, but now with I don't know what the naming is, Halo 2 or New 5 or whatever Zcash is calling it these days.
Yeah.
There will be no trusted setup. But kind of why do you think now is the time for ZK snarks to start taking over?
Right. So it's to do with the removal of the trusted setup for us. I'm not a cryptographer, but the removal of the trusted setup involves like a change to what's called the polynomial commitment scheme that ZK snarks uses. It actually comes, as far as I know, it comes from bulletproofs, an innovation made by bulletproofs, which Monero is using. And as I said, I'm not a cryptographer, but Amir Taki, who I work with, is, and he's written implementations of all the major ZK algorithms, and he understands perfectly the math. So it's not something you necessarily have to trust, right? It's like math. Do you trust math? I think we all do. We're using it already inside of Monero and also Bitcoin and all over the place.